Thank you for all your work in getting this together. It is kind of a homecoming. I see faces from the university when I was working here. So that was over 20 years ago. And thanks to the Craft Council, and Tammy's here representing the Craft Council for co-sponsoring this portion of the event. So I did work here for almost 20 years. And then I ended up working at the University of Manitoba. And at the University of Manitoba, I was involved in an area that's come to be known as learning technologies, although it's had various names throughout the years. And while I worked there, I was reading a bunch of stuff about how technology was changing students' education, how knowledge was acquired, things like the attention spans of students nowadays. People are talking about digital immigrants and digital natives. But I did read this book called Everything is Miscellaneous, and it's by a guy named David Weinberger, who started his career as a joke writer for cartoons, and then went on to get a PhD and ended up at Harvard. But he's sort of, a technological writer, and he came up with this notion of everything is miscellaneous. And so David Weinberger is not him. So Weinberger's thesis basically is, and he's talking about the history of information and the organization of information, and he uses libraries as sort of a metaphor. So he talks about the three orders of order. And the first order of order, and really, again, this is about libraries and printed information documentation. So in the first order of order, things are organized by their physical characteristics. And so in terms of books, and here's an example of an order, the first order of order, where books are basically organized by color, by shape, by size. And again, in the history of libraries, this was how written texts or documents were first organized when they started to be collected. So they're organized by their physical characteristics. And so, I'm trying to make some sort of leap into, well, is there any corollary in the world of art? And so, I look at some of the art from, the 15 and 1600s, and it seems to me it too is kind of organized by its physical characteristics. So it's the surface, the stucco in this chapel that needed some decoration. So artists were brought in and physically applied imagery to this surface. And in terms of sculpture, there's all these plazas with fountains. And again, we've got to spruce this up a bit. So we'll get a sculptor and we'll put some nice figures in all our plazas. So, I think it's a leap, but to me, there's some sense in that this is really a kind of first order of order where art was placed in locations based on the physical characteristics of the work. So the second order of order that Weinberger talks about is the categorization and organization and structure of information in various ways. And so Melville Dewey in 1876, and this is really almost 200-300 years after books began to be printed, devised a system where instead of having books organized by their physical characteristics, there must be a better way of organizing this information. And so he came up with the Dewey Decimal System, and problematic from the beginning because the entire scope of knowledge in 1876 was divided into these categories. And of course, it quickly became apparent that there was books being produced that were really hard to jam into these categories. But it was the first systematic attempt to try to structure a taxonomy or classification system for information and for knowledge. And I think the little text says, until that time, most libraries in the US used fixed positioning. Each book was assigned a permanent shelf position based on the book's height and date of acquisition. And so Dewey was really the first to try to set up some sort of classification system. And again, trying to make this leap into art, we started getting people who tried to organize art into various categories. And these are some of the writers that, and there's, of course, many people who are doing this and still doing this, trying to find classification systems and putting different kinds of art into these different classification systems. And none of these guys is him either. So then we come to the third order of order, and this is sort of the stage that we're just moving into. And in this order of order, things or information becomes not physical. It becomes digital, and it has no location anymore. And so these classification systems are quickly being superseded by classification systems that anybody can devise for themselves, and everybody can create their own classification system, their own order of order. And so it's all subjective, and you control it through the use of basically tags or hashtags or any other kinds of organizational system that you devise. So in this third order of order, everyone has a personal taxonomy, a personal classification system. And a very obvious example is the way people organize their bookmarks. They get to pick the categories that they place things in. So the hierarchy is created by them. And of course, the interesting thing about this is that any piece of information can be a part of anyone's taxonomy, but can be different in everyone's taxonomy. So one piece of information may be important to you in a certain way and important to somebody else in a different way, and you can each classify it in your own way. And when I first started using Flickr, which is a photo sharing site, this is when it really struck me that it was up to me to create my own classification system. And the classification system was relevant to me, probably to no one else. And because of the ability to tag photos in any number of ways, I could have the same image, in this case photograph, tagged and searchable and found and organized by any number of ways, and so could anybody else, right? So to me, this third order of order is the one we're quickly moving into. And I know we have some librarians here, and I'm just wondering about the future of libraries as things go digital, and everybody gets to create their own classifications systems. And of course, with everybody creating their own classification systems, it's easy to find echo chambers and those people who agree with you or have similar thoughts or see things the same way as you do. And of course, I'm going to reference some things in my echo chamber. With this subjective organization of imperial data, everybody is really their own curator of information, which I guess this is what that quote is about. So everybody is content farming, selecting, organizing, and arranging, and finding and displaying work according to their own interests, finding their own meanings for things. Thereby, everything is miscellaneous. Anything can be anything. Okay, and so how this plays out, of course, is through the internet and its various permutations. And I was hoping Cliff would be here. But Cliff is very active. Cliff Island is very active in social media. He teaches at the U of M. And so I can learn a lot about Cliff. He's an artist. I can learn a whole bunch about Cliff by just going on the internet. I mean, I don't have to do really anything else. I can look at the photos he posts. I can see who his friends are, and he's got a lot of them. We have 73 mutual friends. And Cliff is very active, and he's always posting things to, is this still called the wall or the timeline or whatever this thing is called nowadays? And I can sort of see what he's reading, what he's interested in, and you know, what he likes. So I'm getting a real sense of Cliff, getting some sense of Cliff. I don't think I'll ever get a sense of Cliff completely, but I'm getting a really good sense of where he's at as an artist and as an individual just by following him on Facebook, and Cliff is not him. Another person that I do follow a lot is a ceramic artist, Carol Epp, and she is very active, and I have met her in real life, but I think I know more about her and what she's up to by looking at what she's doing online, and she is really active. So she's got this blog that she runs. She's got Pinterest. So she's got, I don't know if you can see this, but she's got 11,634 pins. To me, that's a lot of pins. And she's got 36 boards. And so really, she's created this classification system, this taxonomy of interests, that goes out on the web and puts things in these categories she's created. So here's some more categories. You probably can't read this, but it's photos, sewing ideas, bucket list, food, do-it-yourself, pottery, flock and gather, figure ideas, fabric, art drawings, books to look up. I mean, you can get a real sense of where she's at and what her interests are, and really an insight into her own taxonomy just by looking at all the social media she's doing. She also has a website, very active tweeter, 5,000 tweets, 1,000 followers tweeting. So just keeping up with her is quite a challenge. And Carol is not him. So I guess there's some other personal taxonomies that that I think are of interest or are of interest to me. So one is Joseph Cornell, who is a very strange fellow, lived in New York City his entire life, didn't really ever leave the city. He made these little shadow boxes of these objects, and it's really not clear to me actually how they tie together. But I think there's a great quote. Somewhere in New York City there are 4 or 5 objects that belong together. Once together, they'll make a work of art. And so he is one of the early people who sort of scrounged around and tried to organize these objects he's found, and they created some sort of meaningful merger of items to him. And it's not clear anybody else really knew what was going on. He sort of lived alone with his mother and his brother. So he made things like this, which I think are really interesting because I don't know what they mean. But obviously he did. And there was some sort of organization of objects that, that resonated with him. Tony Cragg, a British artist who collected garbage, of course. And to me, this is a great example of the first order of order. He just sort of collected this garbage or stuff he found, and you know, there's black stuff and there's white stuff, and you know, here's the white stuff in a pile, and here's the black stuff in a pile. Again, more sort of stacks of garbage. This is plastic, organized by color. So first order of order, organizing things by their physical principles. You know, fairly famous person, Louise Nevelson, another New York artist who scoured the streets of New York City, picked up stuff, brought it home, and made these immense sculptural walls, often with the theme of weddings. And early on in her career, she painted everything black. So every object she found, she painted it black, organized it into little cubicles and arranged the cubicles. Later on, she did white and gold work. This is a later work. And again, just an organization of objects according to some sort of personal criteria, organizational scheme that was meaningful to her. Mark Dion is another artist who I think is doing very interesting stuff. And basically, he is another guy who sort of scours places of information and rearranges those, but a little more obviously. So he creates these subjective personal taxonomies and really makes them visible. One of his projects was the Thames River dig. So what this project was about was he got a group of people who would scour the banks of the Thames River at low tide and dig up stuff. And so I'm not sure exactly how long this went on, but you know, he had a group of people who would just, you know, whenever they found some kind of object in the river that they thought might be interesting, they brought it back and they started setting up these tents, and he started organizing these objects that were found. He ended up putting them in the Tate, the gallery in London, organized by this taxonomy he created. And so, you know, he had shards of glass, so he had all the shards of glass sort of in one area, all the ropes in another area, all the metal that he found. So he created this system of organization from these found objects, and he put them in these cabinets of curiosities. He also did a similar project in Venice, where he dredged a certain portion of the Venice Canal and then organized the artifacts that were found. So viewers are free to create their own associations, and of course he's created associations himself. He also reorganized this collection in the Oceanographic Museum of Monaco. Again, taking their existing collection and just organizing it according to his own personal, subjective look at how he thought things should go together. Another project from the Museum of Modern Art, when they were doing an expansion, they ripped down a few buildings and part of a sculpture park that was in existence. And so he just went in there before They started building and scoured the dig for the foundation, found all sorts of stuff, put it in a cabinet of curiosities. So you can see there's a row of bricks, there's some pottery, found lots of razor blades, so we organized all those razor blades in a little case, keys, some printed material. So to me, he's a very interesting guy, sort of subverting sort of archaeology, museology, standard ways of organizing information. And so Claire Bishop, this is also one of my echo chamber people, has written this. Emphasis on the meaningful recontextualization of existing artifacts. Another artist that I've come across recently is Leonardo Drew, who has like the perfect name for an artist. People think that he's finding all these scraps and putting them together. He works on a mammoth scale. But in fact, he has said that, no, he goes to the hardware store and buys all this stuff. And then he burns it and hacks at it and chips at it to make it look like it's used. But he works with new materials. This is a piece, lots of boxes. All his pieces are numbered. Every time he makes a new piece, it's the next number in the sequence. But again, he's working on a mammoth scale, filling whole galleries with one piece. I guess I should talk a little bit about my own work. So in 1979, I did a workshop with this fellow, Lucas Samaras, who is sort of noted for manipulating Polaroids. This is actually a Chuck Close painting of him. So I started working with Polaroids, SX70s. There's the camera. Beautiful little single lens reflex camera that spit out those little 3x3 images that you see downstairs in the gallery. That's some work from that time, and the work in the show downstairs is the reworking of some of those Polaroids that I did in 1980. At one point, Americans spent more money on Polaroid film than on toothpaste, which is kind of interesting. Another project I was involved in was curating a show of photographs taken by Winnipeg Free Press photographers in the year 1959. And so these were generally 4x5 or 2¼ square negatives that were at the Manitoba Archives building. So it was really interesting to look back and look through 1 year's worth of Free Press staff photographer images, make a selection. All these photographs were from the year 1959. This one is of interest to me because Winnipeg had a baseball team then called the Gold Eyes, and this was before the Cuban Revolution. The Cuban Revolution was in 1959, in July, and so the Free Press photographer got this Cuban ball player that was playing for the Winnipeg team to dress up in a Fidel Castro beard and revolutionary hat, hold a rifle, another reference to The Rifleman, which was a TV show at the time. So it was really amazing, this style of photography and how directorial it was, and how these people would actually agree to do this stuff. This was a project where we put photographs in buses that traveled around Winnipeg, in that space where all the advertising goes. So we had 3 buses, and so I had a series of naked children that were frolicking, that were actually censored, and the bus was not allowed to go out. But that's another story. Then I did a project with Per Brask, who teaches here in the theater department. I gave him some photographs that I had taken with no context, and just a black and white photograph, and then he wrote these little texts or stories that accompanied them. And I think this was in 1CO3 at one point. I also did a book with another fellow who wrote a narrative poem about the railroad and its impact on the development of the West, Walter Hildebrand. And then when I sort of retired from working and went back to school, I got really interested in ceramics, and I started building these stacks of ceramic tubes through extruded tubes, curled up these Polaroids and stuck them in the end. And then started doing similar things with wood. Had all sorts of old wood in my garage, didn't know what to do with it, so I started cutting it up and screwing it together. And a few of the pieces are in the show. I'm pretty miscellaneous. Like, this talk is really pretty miscellaneous, but so is everything, right? So one of the other things I like to do, and this is actually something that I did when I was primarily interested in photography, is I like to walk around. And I used to carry a camera around all the time, and I used to pick up pieces with my camera and put them on film. And so then after a while, I sort of didn't take the camera anymore, and I started picking up the things that I thought were interesting that were on the ground. And you find a lot of money on the ground, actually, if you walk the streets. And so this is sort of a statement. Oh, I should show you my little book here. So, I started walking around randomly, and I thought, well, why don't I just do this a little more systematically and try to walk every street in Winnipeg. And so, here's my guide. So I carry this thing around with me, and I have a little felt marker, and then whenever I walk a street, I just, it's color-coded by year, actually. I just sort of mark off that street. So I'm almost done. I have a little ways to go, maybe another year or two. And as I said, I want to walk all of them. And you do find interesting things. Foster Street, which is it's closed. It's in St. Boniface, but it's now turned into sort of this walking path. But it's on my map, so I walk it. And the nice thing is, now you don't even have to take photos, because Google Street View will, you can, I didn't even know they went down back lanes, but they do. And so, I could just grab a Google Street View from whenever this was, 2012, and no need to take a camera. And this is a view of my garage. Yes. I'm not that organized. I don't have shelves with all of them, tabletops and stuff. Yeah, for a while I just walked around, and whenever I saw a parked car, I just stuck my camera underneath it and took a photo. So that's what this is. This is part of the underside of a car. Okay, and finally, um, I also curated a show of a studio photographer who worked on Selkirk Avenue, a Ukrainian fellow who sort of photographed the Ukrainian community in the 50s and 60s. Somehow, I don't even remember how anymore, I came across his negatives in a dumpster, and I retrieved them and gave them to the Ukrainian Cultural Center, Oseredok, and said I'd like to sort of put a show together. And so he ran the Vogue studio, and his name was Dmitry Harapiuk. And if you go downstairs, you'll see, the titles of some of the pieces are the North End Kitchen Party. These are the kinds of photographs he took, and these are, this is sort of the North End Kitchen Party that I'm thinking about, and one I sort of remember from when I was growing up, growing up in an immigrant family. And you can't really see the clock, but it's 20 to 2, and the woman has her hair in curlers, and they're drinking rye and Coke. And, there's like airplanes hanging on the wall. It's, to me, these were really interesting photographs, and it was sort of informing some of the pieces downstairs. One of my favorite photographs. There's one poor guy here, the rebel who doesn't have a girl there. Okay, well, that's all I've got to say. Thank you very much. If you have any questions.